Right. So just to recap, so we went to the very core of God's intention when he created the world. And we spoke about the outer structure and the inner structure, that the inner structure as it is in any type of vessel, like a cup, for example, the inner structure is really what counts. We want the water that is found in the inner structure of the cup, for example. The outer structure is just there for us to enable the gathering of the water. Otherwise, the water would spill everywhere. But really, the inner structure, what's inside the cup, is what counts most, to use that parable. So it is with God. And when he created the entire world is that outer structure, but he created it, the deeper intention, the inner structure of the world is for us to perform mitzvot, to do good deeds. So the whole world was created just for that good deed that we are doing at that moment. That's the internal structure of God's creation. And in a way, the perfect harmony that we can create in the world is by using the world as a platform for that good deed that was the real intention or the internal intention of God's creation. So that was really the big idea, the big fundamental and powerful idea. And continue developing this idea here at the bottom of page 166. But Ronnie, I see you have your hand up.
After last class, I was thinking about the internal and the external. And it's important for I'm talking to me, it's important for me for that internal to constantly be changing, not to stay in a state that it's in, to give it freshness. And it also seems that sometimes then that vessel can become larger because it needs to hold more, it needs to give and it needs to get, but it can't stay stagnant.
Right. Now, very well said. Absolutely. Yeah. You have to constantly grow that internal structure also. And by growing the internal structure, the outer structure also grows. But right, just like it is in a cup, to go back to that parable, the more water I have in the cup, the greater the cup needs to be. But you're right. And the goal is for us to grow internally and to have more and more mitzvahs. Rabbi Steinsaltz, and I think we've said this many times, but Rabbi Steinsaltz was famous for one of his lines that says that if you think you've arrived, you're lost. Because life is a constant journey of growth. You can never say, I've arrived. I want to connect this also to this festival of Sukkot, because this festival of Sukkot speaks of the commandment to dwell in a sukkah. And it's just an interesting thought that I had heard from my own father about the schach, the roof of the sukkah, because the schach has to have three conditions for it to be kosher. The condition number one is that it has to come from the ground. It can't just be, I don't know, something that doesn't come from the ground. On the other hand, so like any type of tree or something like that. On the other hand, also it has to be detached from the ground, so it can't be a hovering tree that's still attached to the ground. And the third is that it cannot be a finished product. So, for example, I can't use a piece of wood that's finished, a bench, a chair, a table, whatever it may be, and just throw it as on top of my sukkah to serve as the roof. Because again, it has to be an unfinished product. Same with life. In life, we have to come from the ground. In other words, we have to know our roots. On the other hand, we can't just say, oh, my great-grandfather was a big tzaddik and my great-grandmother was such a holy woman. I don't have to work on myself. You have to be detached from the ground in that sense. You have to grow your own tree. But and as we do so, as we work on ourselves and grow our own selves, then we have to remember that we can never say that we're a finished product. That's condition number 3. We have to always see ourselves as unfinished. And that's what makes us kosher, just like the schach. In any case, that's to the idea again, that internal structure has to constantly grow. All right, thank you for sharing that, Ronnie. Good. Let's continue at the bottom of page 166. Does anyone want to read?
I'll read if nobody else does.
Thank you.
Okay. Descending degree by degree through the myriads of degrees in the evolution of the worlds by means of cause and effect and innumerable contractions. The divine energy that sustains the world derives from the back or external aspect of the divine will, passing through a multi-phase process of concealment and diminution known as the evolution of the worlds, Hishtalishut Halamot. A great number of worlds or levels of reality evolve one from another, descending like the links of a chain, the top of one world linked through the bottom of one above. Each world derives from its predecessor, not by a quantum leap, but by a link of cause and effect. This serves to either further conceal the divine source of creation. If each level of reality had no visible connection to its predecessor, this would manifestly point to the presence of a supra-existential creator. The fact that the worlds follow a traceable path of causational evolution creates the illusion of a natural origin of each world in the world above it, obscuring and distancing the creator from his creation.
Right. So he connects it back to the idea that we spoke about on page 165, and that is that there are two ways that God sustains the world. One is direct sustenance. So he's completely involved in sustaining, for example, us and our lives. On the other hand, especially if we're in sync with him, right? On the other hand, also that outer structure that we're speaking about, that comes from a different type of sustenance. And that is when God sustains the world as if he's throwing it over his back, right? We said that it's almost like giving a present to someone that you don't necessarily want to give a present to, so you throw it over your back. You don't give it to him with your whole will, with your whole desire, with a big smile. You say, okay, I have to give it to you. Here it is, over your back. Now, the world, because it's the outer structure, so God sustains it like that. He doesn't necessarily have his entire will and desire invested in the creation of that stone. No, his entire desire and will is invested in the creation of us and us doing mitzvahs, and that mitzvah that we're about to do. But and that's that internal structure that comes again from the second type of sustenance. The first type of sustenance, like he said, is behind the back. Now, it's an important idea because I think that it would also enhance the way we live. We live meaningfully and purposefully in this world. If we knew at all times that the whole idea of creation, the whole intention of creation, the internal structure of God, as he says it so beautifully here, was ready for us to do that mitzvah, we would never stop doing mitzvahs. We would say to ourselves, oh, whoa, that's why God created everything here, including the Grand Canyon that is so beautiful, and Sedona and so many other beautiful places in Arizona. The whole idea of God creating all of these structures, all of these external structures, was for us then to fill them with mitzvahs. Just imagine, wow. It's like the Mishnah famously says, Bishvili nivra olam. The world was created for me. It doesn't mean that, of course, in a narcissistic way or in an egotistic way. No, the world wasn't created for you and your personal pleasures. The world was created for you. In other words, it was created for you to come then that actor that fills the stage and plays that role. Otherwise, what's the purpose of the stage? What's the purpose of all the decorations on the stage if the actor doesn't come and fulfills that role? It's like going to a concert and waiting for the performer to come on stage, and it's all beautiful and the lighting is there and the sound is ready and the decorations are there, and the actor doesn't show up. Imagine going to a concert like that. You would want your money back. But then the producers can come and tell you, one second, we paid for the sound, we paid for the lighting, we paid, why want your money back? But you deserve your money back. Why? Because you don't come to look at the beautiful stage. You came for the actor to come and play his role. Same here with God. God created this entire world. Why? For you to show up and play your role. So you can say, well, no, it's enough. There's the Grand Canyon, that's enough. But that's not the intention. That's not the internal structure we're speaking about here. That's
There was
not
a rabbi.
Will was
There was a
invested.
rabbi who said you should have two notes in your pocket.
Right.
One, that the whole world was created for you. And in the second pocket, the note should be that you're going to be reduced to dust and ashes.
Right. I'm but dust and ashes, like Abraham said. Right. Exactly. So that when you feel too haughty or too arrogant, then you should go to that second note and say you're but dust and ashes. But when you feel like you don't want to show up and play that role, then you should take out a note that says Bishvili nivra olam. That's right. The world was created for me, because it's true. I mean, and it's an astounding thought. You know, I know, Ronnie, you have your hands up. I just want to share a quick story that shares this powerful message, but it's about the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson of blessed memory, who, when he came to America, he was already a very frail man. He had suffered a lot. He was beaten by the Soviets, and he escaped the wrath of Nazism at the very last second too, and finally came to America, and he had to rebuild his whole Hasidic dynasty and everything he had back in Russia and then in Europe. So he was engaged in fundraising efforts quite a bit. And there was a man, I forget where he was, I think in Chicago, that owned a very big textile company. And someone told him, you should try and go and fundraise, but we were unsuccessful. This man has a lot of money. He could give you a nice check, but we haven't been successful. Maybe you, Rebbe, if you go, you'll make an impression and he'll be able to give you a nice check for your institutions. So the Rebbe went to this man who again owned a big textile factory. And he came to him and he said to him, look, where are you from? And the man says, I'm from Poland in Europe. Says, oh, and what are you doing? I have a big textile factory. He says, oh, you have a textile factory? Yes, I own also a lot of clothing stores. Oh, wow. So can you please do me a favor? The Rebbe tells him, look, there's a button that's a little bit loose here on my coat. Can you fix it for me? And the man says, really, Rebbe, that's why you came to see me? For button? There's millions of alteration places. I don't have time for this. And he says, well, listen to what you're saying. You think your soul was sent down to this world with all the miracles you experienced from Poland, now coming to America, just to do a little factory, to have another clothing store, to have another little button. Your soul was sent down to this world to change the world. And you dealing with buttons? Come support us. And we're changing the world. Come do good deeds. Come connect to that internal structure. Come show up on stage and play your role. And the man was so moved by that parable and by that idea that he gave him apparently a nice check, and he became a strong supporter of his institutions. But it's true. Sometimes we say to look at our lives and we say, what, really? We came down to fix a little button? That's what life is about? No. Life is about really changing the world. Bishvili nivra olam. God is waiting for you. He created the world for you. Now he wants you to show up, go change that world that he created for you. And we're dealing with buttons. So it's a very powerful idea. If we think about it, where we wouldn't stop engaging in mitzvot, in doing good deeds. But Ronnie, go for it. I'm sorry.
I accept your apology. So if our purpose is not to just fix buttons, what is it? And you know what? I'm going to bow out of this question because it's an unending question. So an unending answer. So continue, please. I'm sorry.
Okay. All right. Fine. No problem. If you want to condense it to one idea, I'm happy to listen to it. I mean, that's what it's all about, really.
Isn't this all just one idea?
Yes, we said it at the get-go, right? The whole idea is that ein od milvado, there's nothing but God. Oneness in creation. At the beginning of this chapter 6, yeah. Okay. Any other ideas, comments, disagreements, questions? No. Okay, so let's continue then on page 167. Again, I encourage questions. And Ron, if you want to ask that question, you're more than welcome. But otherwise, we can continue on 167. Continue. All right, let's continue. 167. Who wants to continue to read? Margot,
Want me to read? I'll read. Okay.
Go
Until
for
the
it. Thank
divine light and life are so diminished through repeated diminutions that they can be contracted and enclosed in a state of exile within that separated thing. The divine energy that sustains creation is more than a life force. It originates as a ray of divine light, fully expressing the infinite power of God. But each link in the chain of the evolution of the worlds is a screen that dims its light, until at the last screen, only the life force is manifest, whereas its inner divine element is blurred or completely obscured. The divine light is then in exile. The existences it sustains do not sense the divine source of their being and life, and might even deny its very existence. A person in exile is one who finds himself where he does not want to be and is forced to remain there and operate under alien and confining circumstances. In this sense, the divine light that sustains the material world is in exile, forced to operate within and provide being and life to a reality that is hostile to it, being dictated to by a reality it should be dictating. This phenomenon is known as Gelut HaShekhinah, the exile of the divine presence.
Right, and I think this is one of the also foremost and foundational Kabbalistic ideas, that when God created the world, and that's the other side of the stage, right, that we're speaking about. When God created this world, in order for the world to actually be and not explode by the divine light that created it, God needed to conceal that light, just almost like a light bulb. I think we spoke about this, that God, you can't bring the whole power station to any room, otherwise the electricity would burst. So he needs to confine it until it can enter a light bulb, and that light bulb can serve its purpose of lighting. Same with this world. God created this world. It's the source of all creation. But in order for it to exist, he needed to confine for matter to then express itself and exist and not just explode. And not only that, not just for matter itself, but also for enabling even man to show up and do his part. Otherwise, there would be so much light that there would be no need for man, or man maybe could not even sustain that light. It says that when God gave the Torah, then we were there around Mount Sinai, and God uttered the first commandment. And when God uttered that first commandment, our souls expired. We couldn't just, our souls heard God's voice. From the power of that electricity, so to speak, right? Our souls expired and returned to God, and God had to resuscitate us. And God gave the second commandment, and the same thing happened until we said to God, you know what, we can't take it anymore. Let Moses speak to us. You tell the commandments to Moses, and then we'll hear the rest of the commandments from him. But again, because when there's this revelation of divinity, then it immediately blinds everything, or the light is so powerful that everything else almost melts in this divine presence. So God needed to contract himself, which is also known as the idea of tzimtzum in Kabbalah, for us to exist and for the world itself to exist. Now, on the other hand, the other side of that, the other side of this big idea of tzimtzum is that the world is really, the divine light in the world is really in exile. It's in exile because it was forced to be confined. And it's forced to find itself in a stone that really it has no relationship with it. What is the divine light going to do with matter, with the stone? But when we come and show up on stage, as mentioned, and stand on that stone and say a blessing over food or do a mitzvah, whatever it may be, the stone, now the divine light in that stone feels, oh, I've been redeemed. Now I can connect to something because that mitzvah is exactly the same light that is found in me, that I am. And I had no relationship with the stone. quite the opposite. The stone was confining me, was like a prison to me. But all of a sudden, now you come and perform this mitzvah while stepping on me. I can finally, I feel like, oh, I've been redeemed. I'm connecting. I'm the two currents of electricity are finally touching each other.
Mm.
And that's why really each time we show up on that stage and do that mitzvah, we are redeeming the world from its exile, or more accurately, we are redeeming the divine lights that are in exile, the divine lights that were used by God himself, or the divine lights of God to create this world, are being redeemed. Until then, they're in exile. Shchinta begaluta, as it says. Shchina is in exile. And that's yet another reason why we should never stop doing mitzvahs. Not just because God is waiting for us to show up on stage, but again, because by doing that, we are redeeming those divine lights that are in exile, as it says, the exile of the divine presence. Yes, Ronnie.
A few things. Let's start with the last thing you said, doing mitzvahs. For me personally, when I do mitzvahs, I know I'm making somebody else happy, but it also nourishes my heart and soul. And I think without that, I don't know why I would be lost. And you said, who exiled the light? Who forced it to dim? What caused that to happen? What was the purpose?
Right. So just to relate to that first question and into the second question, but the first question is, yeah, makes sense. Each time we do a mitzvah, I'm sure it happens with everyone here. Each time you do a mitzvah, it feels good. Why? Because it's not just the light in the stone, like we said, that's being redeemed, but it's the light in you that's being redeemed. Your neshama is triggered when it does a mitzvah, because it feels like, oh, finally, I'm fulfilling my purpose. So that soul that might be in exile from time to time or throughout the day, in some moments of the day, all of a sudden feels, oh, I'm being nourished. So it feels good.
And at that point, it feels like light is being emitted from me.
Absolutely, right. Absolutely. So it's not just the light in the stone, it's the light in you that's being redeemed, because our light sometimes is also in exile. The divine presence in you is also in exile. And when we do a mitzvah, we release it, or we redeem it. Now, regarding the second question, God is the source of all creation. God is the constant creator. So God is the one who limited those lights in order, again, for the world to be. If he would reveal them as they are at their source, again, the world could not exist. It would be too powerful for this world. That's why the Midrash says that when God created the world, he created it with the attribute of justice. And because again, he had to create very firm structures to this world, internal and external structures. But then he saw that there was too much justice in the world. So shitef bo midat harachamim, as the Midrash says. He added the attribute of compassion, of mercy. Maybe that's a better translation. Added the attribute of mercy to balance a little bit the justice. But really, the world is a very confining place. It's the attribute of justice. And each time we do a mitzvah, then all of a sudden that divine light is redeemed, and it feels that it's not being confined with this attribute of justice, but rather quite the opposite, it's being redeemed, maybe with the attribute of mercy that we are adding to
it. The silly thought that went through my mind listening to you just now is that God created a beautiful football stadium for we humans to play in.
Yeah, I mean, that's the stage, right? Good idea. It's football Sunday, so it fits. But you're right. We got to show up and play. We're that player, that quarterback.
Have to show up.
That's the idea, yeah.
Is the exile of the divine presence another way of looking at the breaking of the vessels, the shards, trying to put it back together again?
Right, that's right. So the idea stems, very good, William. The idea stems from really the Zohar that speaks about how the first sin, the primordial sin of Adam and Eve, is what caused this exile. Before that, we were in a state of paradise. Adam and Eve were created and they were placed in Gan Eden, in paradise. And then they sinned. And with that sin, they were sent to exile. What happened Kabbalistically? That God's divine light was almost shattered into 288 sparks. And the task of us is to redeem those sparks. Now, the sparks can have many other derivatives too. So it's not just 288, according to some, but I'm no maven in these numbers. But the point is that these sparks are scattered throughout the world. And each time we do a mitzvah, we redeem those sparks. And we almost restore the world to its primordial state of Gan Eden. And that's really the idea of Mashiach, that each time we do a mitzvah, we're helping restore the world so that it can return to that state of Eden, and then Mashiach will come. And then the world will be redeemed. So that's the big idea, yeah. Jordan, you wanted to say something?
You were speaking about the concepts of justice and mercy, and it brought to mind the tradition of adding some water to the Kiddush wine.
Yeah.
Is that a similar tie-in there?
Right. No, that's excellent. It is very much connected. There is a custom. Not everyone does it, but there's a custom that on Friday night when we say Kiddush ought to be said over red wine on Friday night. Red is the color of justice, and as we just said, we don't want too much justice, so we add some water, some drops of water, which represent kindness. Water flows naturally, so just like kindness that flows naturally, and we add some drops of water to the redness of the wine to balance the justice with a little bit of kindness. It's very much connected because it's the same idea, but not only that, because Friday night is really the time in which that came immediately after the sin. So according to the Midrash and other sources, even the Zohar, Adam and Eve were created on Friday morning, 6th day of creation. And just a few hours later, they sinned on Friday afternoon. God couldn't expel them immediately because Shabbat was coming. Shabbat is the time of complete paradise. So they were expelled really on Saturday night. But that time of justice where they sinned and God said, okay, now exile has to come, was really Friday night. So it's represented by that redness of the wine. So we say to God, just like then you had some mercy, have some mercy now also on this Friday night. So it's very much connected to Adam and Eve, yeah. Yes, Rabbi Eisen, please.
I want to go back to the buttons.
Yes.
What you just said about, the mitzvot and this and that. If I'm missing a button, my hazen won't stay. So how is it that it seems like, maybe I misunderstood. Going after the big idea of changing the world is nice, but unless you've taken the appropriate steps, the little things, you're never going to be able to do it. And so in some ways it says, skip all the mitzvot, just go out and do social justice. I can make a better impact that way. It doesn't, if there's a protest on Shabbat, I go do that instead of Shabbat.
Right. Okay. I'm so glad.
And eco-kashrut, is it maybe stunning an animal first is more important. Maybe it is more humane, or putting them out with some kind of organic injection. I mean, without the buttons, you can't do anything. I mean, with all due respect. It's just...
No, beautifully said. And I make that mistake quite often, that when I speak about changing the world, people think immediately that you have to engage in acts that seemingly change the world, and you forget the details. But we have to emphasize, and I'm so glad you brought this up, because what we mean by changing the world, especially in Kabbalah and Hasidus, and I think in all Jewish sources, is that it starts with the self. not only that, but sometimes that little mitzvah is what changes the world much more than any act of social justice. And what we mean by cleaning buttons is where we're dealing. I think what the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe would say meant when he said, "Oh, your soul didn't just come to clean buttons," means your soul didn't just come to run a clothing store, which is a very materialistic and maybe even self-serving purpose. Your soul came to change the world. In other words, came to look outwards, to face outwards, and do good deeds. Not necessarily, social justice or any of that are seeming, and I emphasize the word seeming, acts of changing the world. What he was saying is that go and maybe put on tefillin, go and maybe give $5 to tzedakah. That changes the world. I just read yesterday, and it's so interesting because I read yesterday a story about the Lubavitcher Rebbe, which I read every Saturday on Shabbat afternoon. And there was a story about this man, Marty Jacobs, who was a lawyer. I think it was Marty Jacobs, maybe not. Some other man, or whatever, a human being, a Jew, who was very despondent after the Lubavitcher Rebbe sent him to this specific place to find Jews, and he only found one Jew, and that one Jew was an owner also of a big store, and he told him, "Look, I was sent by the Lubavitcher Rebbe and blah, blah, blah. Can you please put on tefillin?" The man said yes. He said, "But I want to do this in my office in the back." When he was walking towards his office in the back, the guy changed his mind. He said, "You know what? It's not a good time for me. Leave me alone." He says, "But you just agreed. Leave me alone. It's not a good time for me." So the only Jew he found, well, he was able to convince him to put on tefillin. But in the end of the day, the guy changed his mind. So he came back to the Rebbe after many efforts of trying to find other Jews and trying to continue to convince this man. And he said to the Rebbe, "Look, I'm very despondent. I found only one Jew. And I finally agreed. He finally agreed, but then he changed his mind. I feel like a complete failure." And the Rebbe told him, "Look, the problem that you have is that you are looking at one mitzvah as one mitzvah. I look at one mitzvah as gunpowder." That's the example he used, gunpowder. When you play with gunpowder, you're not just playing with powder. That powder stays there. That powder then explodes towards all of its surroundings. And that's the idea. When you play with one mitzvah, when you even just speak Judaism to one person, you're playing with gunpowder, good gunpowder. And that explodes, that creates ripple effects that do change the world. And very often, we're for some reason, either maybe we're wired that way as human beings, or maybe it's simply the society that we live in that compartmentalize this idea that, there are big deeds and there are small deeds, which is a distorted way of looking at the world. Because first of all, the big deeds are usually not big deeds, unfortunately. And the small deeds are actually very big deeds. Sometimes, again, dealing with one human being and speaking to him about Judaism creates this explosion effect because it's gunpowder. That's why maybe the ethics of our fathers tells us that you have to look at one little light mitzvah, what seems to be light in your eyes, as a very, very interesting, as a very big mitzvah. Why? Because we did not know the power of mitzvot. One mitzvah that might seem so small in our eyes is really very big. That mitzvah changes the world. So Rabbi Eisen, I'm glad you brought this up, because indeed, when we speak of changing the world, and I should emphasize this each time, but I'll try to do so from now on. When we speak of changing the world, we're really speaking of doing just that mitzvah, that little detail. That might seem like a little detail or like a small step for man, but it's really a giant step for mankind, to quote Armstrong.
Mm.
Yeah.